Okay, hello. All right, great. Let's go and get started. So the session today is going to be about simplifying testing by automatically populating your sandboxes with test data. So my name is Gasha Patel. I'm one of the founders of SF Apex, and I helped to develop one of the original code bases for copying data into these sandboxes. So a little bit about the agenda for today's session. We're going to talk a little bit about our story, challenges in test data preparation, a couple of different options on how you can get data into these sandboxes, and then really talk about software testing, best practices for software testing if you're developing or doing any sort of customizations. And then finally, we'll kind of get into a demo about using the SF Apex tool to populate data into your sandboxes. So SF Apex, we're founded back in 2012, have over 5,000 downloads. We've probably copied about 65 terabytes, probably a little bit more than that, of data into these sandboxes, and we've refreshed more than 10,000 sandboxes. So we've been doing this for quite some time. So some challenges in test data preparation. So the first thing is that creating test data is fairly complicated. So one of the things about fabricating dummy data and trying to put that inside your sandboxes is it's going to take a long time to first really generate the right sort of records that match sort of the complexity of the data that exists inside your production org. So that, of course, requires a lot of labor in order to use things like Excel spreadsheets with VLOOKUPs to remap IDs in conjunction with your data loader. We've seen other folks, they'll try to develop out scripts. The only issue with that is that once you add in new objects and new lookup and master detail fields, you pretty much have to go back and try to retool those scripts, and that gets pretty boring pretty quickly. And so I've, in a previous life of mine, I've gone down this route of trying to develop out scripts for it, and it seems like every time you want to spin up a new dev box, you're having to retool the script in order to get data inside these dev sandboxes. So typically what we found is that the average for populating data into a sandbox manually using one of these two methods either takes between about 1 or 2 days. And of course, if you're trying to do something larger like a full sandbox, it's probably going to take a lot longer than that. So now, the third option here is basically you can go out and you can purchase a full sandbox or a partial data sandbox. I'm sure many of you guys have already tried this. It's roughly around 25% of your annual contract value, which for some organizations can get pretty costly. So, really the solution here is that Salesforce gives you, for Enterprise and Ultimate Edition licenses, about 100 of these dev sandboxes. You also get about 5 Dev Pro sandboxes, and you'll probably get about 1 full sandbox and maybe 1 or 2 partial data sandboxes. So the key is, how do you really leverage these Dev and Dev Pro sandboxes that don't have any data inside them in order to do your development or your testing? Now, the second issue is quality of data. So, again, as I mentioned, with fabricating data, it never really quite matches the sophistication of the data that actually exists inside your production org, nor does it ever really, match the complexities or really all the different data scenarios that exist inside your data, inside your production org. So if you're writing code, and it's a lot easier to write code against actual production data than to try to fabricate data and write code against that. And so if you're writing code against actual production data, one, you're going to produce higher quality code. And two is you can do a lot more developer testing against actual production data, so you're able to catch bugs a lot sooner in the development process rather than having to push your code into QA, go through change management procedures, and then only to find that there's failed test cases. Now you got to go back into development, retool the code, and then try to push that back into QA again. So. The other issue is maintaining data relationships. So again, building out VLOOKUPs inside Excel spreadsheets. I've done it in the past. It's not very fun. So using this tool, you can actually maintain all those relationships between the records automatically, and it also figures out the correct order to insert in the record. So for example, if you have parent accounts and child accounts, it knows builds a hierarchy dynamically. And based on that hierarchy, it's going to go and insert in the parent accounts first, then the children of those, and so on and so forth. The last point here is really stale data. So we have a lot of customers who, before they got our product, they used to refresh a dev sandbox, and they do a lot of development inside this dev sandbox. And the problem is that the development cycle just kept on going and going and going. They always got new requirements from users. So they never really had time to refresh their dev sandbox to get that latest copy of their metadata into these dev sandboxes. So now they haven't refreshed this dev sandbox in over 2 years, and all of a sudden they're complaining about, well, we did our testing, our development inside the dev sandbox, and all of a sudden now we take it into QA and it no longer works as expected. So, all right. So the last option here is data security. So again, regulations compliance for those in the healthcare space or the financial space. The tool does have the ability to scramble data and obfuscate data. You can also apply data masking to any type of field across any object. And so if you have things like PII data, financial information, you can definitely scramble that. We give a lot of data masking options there as well, so that the scrambled value still looks like a real social security number, credit card number, account number, date of birth, first name, all that sort of good stuff. All right. So options for populating testing sandboxes. So again, full sandbox, you can refresh it once every 25 days. Oop, Windows updates. Yeah, it's always updating. All right. So you can refresh a full sandbox once every 29 days. So again, that's probably not good enough for a lot of companies, because they're probably going into different rounds of UAT once every couple of days, especially if you guys are using the sprint methodology. You guys are probably pumping out code and trying to get it tested as quickly as possible. So refreshing a full sandbox probably isn't going to be the fastest way to really progress in the sprint methodology. So now you have a partial data sandbox that you can refresh once every 5 days. Now here's the issue with the partial data sandbox. You can define a data template, all right, and you've got your accounts. They have a 10K account records, 10K contact records. But the problem is that whenever you go to actually populate that partial data sandbox, whenever you spin it up, those 10K account records don't really match up with those 10K of contact records, right? So if you don't have accounts that actually have relatable contacts or vice versa, then all of a sudden all this Apex code starts breaking and the data really does make sense. So, in my mind, that really makes a partial data sandbox very useless as far as data templates go. Now, you could use the data loader and manually load this in. Again, I've done this many, many times, and you're going to spend a ton of hours trying to do this. And if you just get it just right, great, you've got one dev sandbox, but for many of your development teams, you probably need about 10 different dev sandboxes. So unless you have a full-time position that does this solely, using data loader to reliably populate these dev sandboxes is probably not the best thing in the world. All right. So now generating test data. Again, it's resource intensive, time consuming, tedious, and but it is safe. But again, that's mainly going into your Dev Pro or Dev Sandboxes and clicking on, okay, new account, type inside all the fields, new contact, type inside all the fields. And again, it's a very time consuming process. All right, so let's talk a little bit about software testing. So when you think about software testing, you've got a lot of different ways of testing out code before it actually gets into production. So one of them is going to be unit testing. And this really starts with the developers writing either unit tests or, as they're coding, kind of testing along the way. Then you have your integration testing, and this is really everybody's putting their code inside a single integration sandbox, and they're really doing a lot of testing to make sure everybody's code kind of plays well together. Then you have your QA testing. This is really focused on processes more than actual end users meeting requirements, which is actually the next one, which is UAT, where you're really making sure that you're meeting all the end user requirements. And then, of course, you have a training environment, and this is really where you can kind of prep the end users about any sort of new functionality that you're developing before you actually go live. Okay, and then finally, of course, you have your staging environment, and this is really where you're going to be loading in all your metadata, and if you do have any sort of data changes, you can put that there. And staging environment, of course, is supposed to replicate your production environment, so that if it works great on staging, it's going to work great on production. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the cost of not testing your data, right? So at the conception stage, if you catch a bug, great, fairly easy to fix. It's real quick, one line of code, doesn't cost a whole lot. If you catch it in the design stage, it's going to cost about 10 times more to actually fix that bug. At development stage, it's around 100 times. Testing, it's about 1,000 times. If you happen to catch that bug over in production, it's going to be about 10,000 times the amount of time it would have taken just to kind of fix it, either at the design stage or even at the development stage. Okay. All right, so let's talk about populating sandboxes with SF Apex. So now, if you're populating sandboxes using the tool, then you can effortlessly copy data between sandboxes. So The way that works is that you can actually define the data sets that you want to kind of carve out that fits into a dev or a dev pro sandbox. And you can also select metadata as well and choose to copy that over if you like. Now you can also specify where clauses to kind of zero in on the records that you're going after. You can also randomly select records, and this is really important if you're populating a testing sandbox where you don't want to pump it full of the same data over and over again, because if you do that, then you're not really getting the most value out of the test cases that your end users are running. So if you're able to randomize that data, you're really going to get more value because it's going to be a better data sampling of your entire data population that exists on your production org. Now, as far as data relationships go, you don't have to worry about VLOOKUPs and remapping IDs and all that other good stuff. The tool will really take care of that for you. So it's going to insert in the parent record, grab that new ID, plug it into all the child fields, the lookup fields, the master detail fields, in order to get those child records in. And it kind of iteratively does this until it gets all the data in. Now the tool also handles circular references, so if you have circular references between objects or records, the tool automatically figures out how to do that as well. And then of course you can also specify child objects. So this is really key. We have a lot of customers who they'll select 10 objects and say, oh well, I just want to go and copy over all my child records. Now the problem with that is that those 10 accounts probably have about a gig of data associated with them, and if you're copying into a dev or dev pro sandbox, you really can't fit all that data inside there. So the name of the game is really kind of defining or carving out that perfect data set that's going to fit inside dev, but also meets your development as well as your testing needs. And so the tool really provides a lot of facets in order to do that. Finally, data security, right? This is always very, very key for healthcare, financial institutions. You don't want your data to go through third-party servers, and if you do have it go through third-party servers, you got to get your security architecture team involved, and that's a very long, drawn-out process. So with this tool, it's installed on computer within your network, all communications between the computer that you installed on and Salesforce.com. There is no middleman or anything like that. And of course, it uses TLS 1.3 in order to secure the communication channels. All right. Okay, so let's go and take a look at everything that I kind of talked about here. I'll go through a very, very quick demo here. So I'm going to get the application launched up. Okay. And I'm going to get logged into the source. Now keep in mind that the source can be any type of sandbox, or it could be your production org if you like as well. Same goes for the destination as well. Could be Sandboxes or any production org. Now if I go and hit new copy project, it's going to go and open up the main application window here. And now up at the top we've got a listing of our objects. So we've got the account object first. Now I can come in here and select a handful of records that I want to go and copy over. I'll go and hit the checkbox. And now the application is going to ask me, okay, for these 4 account records, what related child records do you want to also bring in? So I can say none of the child records, all the child records, level 1, 2, or 3. Or I can even do a custom. Now, if I do a custom, it's going to open up, we call this our links window. It's kind of like an ERD diagram for all the objects associated with that account object. So I can come in here and I can put my mouse over account, and here's all the stuff that are child objects to account, and the blue lines are the parent objects to account. So I can say, okay, for those 4 accounts, I want to include the related tasks. And of course, it also includes the parents of tasks. I could do email message relation. I'll just go and select a few child objects here as well. And then I'll go and hit finished. So now the tool is scanning through all those objects, finding all the related child and parent records. And once we have that, now we can kind of view, okay, well, what is the actual data set that we're going to be copying over? Well, we have our 4 accounts. We have 5 related contacts. We've got 8 related cases and 9 related opportunities. Okay, great. So now, before we do a data copy, I want to quickly show you guys another way of selecting out data. So you can go and click on Include All Records over here. And if you do that, it kind of opens up a window where you can do more of a query-based approach to selecting out the data that you're going after. And this is really great if you're trying to do a larger volume of data. Now, I can say, okay, let's go and copy over all my accounts, and I'm going to apply a where clause over here. I can do where, for example, name equals XYZ. If you have a more sophisticated where clause, you can go ahead and plug that in over here as well. And then based on that, again, I've got the children here. So let me go ahead and click on the children. And I'll go ahead and do all children of these accounts. Now let's assume that these accounts have 50 million related cases. Well, you can't fit 50 million related cases inside a Dev or a Dev Pro sandbox. So I can come down here to case. And I can say, okay, at max, just include 4,000 related cases. And by the way, I only want cases where supplied company equals XYZ, for example, right? And now I could also do an order by here. So if you're only interested in the latest 50,000 or 4,000 cases, you can go and do an order by created date descending, and that's going to go and grab the latest 4,000 cases. Now, we can also modify the children of this. So even though we said all children of count, when we hit these 4,000 cases, I only want the level 1 children. So the point of this window is that at every single level inside the hierarchy, for every single object, you can define a where clause, you can define a limit statement on the number of records, you can even change how the application traverses through the hierarchy of objects. And in order to kind of carve out that perfect data set that we talked about, that fits your development and your testing needs. All right? Okay, great. So now that we've kind of have our data set that we're going after, the next step I'm going to go and do is hit start data copy. Now, what the tool is doing is it's actually disabling all that metadata inside the destination org. It never touches the source, but on the destination, it's going to disable things like triggers, workflows, validation rules, repairable master fields. It's got a bunch of different stuff, flow definitions. It even modifies the permission for the user account that you're logging into the destination to make all the fields readable, making all the record types accessible. And once it's done that, now it's actually going to go and do a data copy. And in this data copy, you can actually see a live view of the progress of it. You can see what's been completed, and if there's anything that errored out, you can actually see that on a per record basis. So for example, the email address is invalid. I can go back to the source, correct the email address, hit retry all failed records, and that's going to go and retry just these failed records, right? Now, there's a bunch of other features within the tool that I'll quickly kind of go over here. You can also do data translations, and that works again on any type of field. So if you need to map any particular value to a different value, you can do that. We also support the ability to copy metadata as well. And this is a pretty neat little feature. I'll just kind of show this really quick here. So for example, I can go and select my custom objects, and the tool is now going to download the metadata between the source and destination, run a quick comparison between all the object files, and highlight in red exactly what's different. And I could even go inside the file, and I can say, okay, show me all the lines of code that are actually different, right? And I can come in here and I can say, okay, well, you know what? I want to copy over this difference, but I don't want to copy over this difference, right? And now I can go and do a hit a save. Again, I can copy over entire files of metadata as well. Or I can even say, let's just go and copy over all my objects into the destination. And that's going to go and copy that over. Now, there's metadata dependencies that we do, deployment options, and then also deleting metadata out of the destination, but I won't get too deep into those. So finally, the last feature that I kind of wanted to do here is the ability to do backup and restores using the tool as well. Now, I don't have a formal demo for this, so I'll try to talk you through this. For the backup side, we can choose to do full and incremental backup. So we can say, go and take a full backup once every 7 days. Every day in between, go and do an incremental. Or we could do ad hoc backup. So, I just want to back up these 10 accounts under the related child records. Now, on the restore side, you can choose to restore as of any date and time, and you don't have to restore the whole data set. You can just restore those 10 accounts that the admin accidentally deleted, for example. And finally, the coolest part about that, I got about 2 minutes remaining. The coolest part about this application is the new rollback capability. So imagine if you have a full sandbox and you guys are doing UAT inside the full sandbox. Well, chances are during that UAT process, your end users probably only touched maybe about 1% of the data inside that overall full sandbox. So rather than restoring that entire 99% of that data back again, which takes on the order of hours or days, you can now restore or roll back just that single 1%. So, and that takes about, maybe about 5-10 minutes to do. And so within about 5 or 10 minutes, you've got that full sandbox back to its original condition. And so now it's ready for that next round of UAT, right? So you're able to leverage and utilize your full sandboxes a lot more effectively. All right. So guys, that was my quick 15 minutes here. Let's go and jump into QA. Does anybody have any questions? Good.
Which server is this tool housed?
Sure, great question. So the question was, where's this thing housed? So it's a Windows-based application. We are developing a cloud-based application. If you guys want more information about that, let us know. Stop by our booth by the Twilight Campfire. But it is a Windows-based application, so you can install it on your laptop, your desktop. If you guys have a network server or a cloud server, you can install it there as well.
And do we need to take snapshots, or is it like a direct?
This is a direct data copy, so it's literally reading data from the source, and straight through memory, it's going to go and stream it into the destination. Okay. For pricing information, there's a series of questionnaires that's sent out based on the responses. We can provide pricing. General level pricing, if you got 10 active users inside your Salesforce, Costs about $100 for one license, and that's for 1 year. And all of your admins and developers can use the tool against your one production org and all of its relatable sandboxes. Okay. Yeah. Yep. So if you define a data selection, you can actually, you can actually save it as a project file, and then reuse the project file to populate multiple dev sandboxes. Yes, we do. So you can actually connect to Scratch orgs and populate Scratch orgs as well. Okay. All right, great. I think that's time. So thank you very much for your time. I'll answer it after the session here. So, and by the way, if you guys have any questions or want to come check us out, we're right next to the Twilight Theater.